I still remember the night it all began. The night I thought I was saving my marriage, but I was really signing away my peace. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. My husband, Daniel, sat on the couch with his head in his hands. His mother's words still echoed in my ears from the phone call earlier. Asterisk. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything. Asterisk. $80,000. That was the number they kept throwing at me like a dagger to the chest. His family's business had collapsed, his father's investments gone wrong, and somehow it had all become my problem. First, I wanted to say no. I had worked so hard for my savings. Every single dollar I had earned from staying up nights managing projects, saving for our dream house. But Daniel's eyes that night were filled with panic. He said, "Babe, please. I promise this is temporary. Once we get through this, things will be better. Mom and Dad just need a lifeline." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love meant sacrifice. So I said yes. And just like that, I wired my life savings to his family's account. $80,000 gone in a single click. I remember my hands trembling as I pressed send. But I told myself it was worth it. Because I loved him. Because we were a team. But deep down I felt something off. His mother's tone when she thanked me was cold. No warmth, no gratitude, just a curt, "That should be enough for now." And Daniel? He didn't hug me like he used to. He looked relieved. Almost like a burden had been lifted. But not from our shoulders, just his. For the next few weeks I tried to convince myself things were fine. I cooked his favorite meals, planned little date nights, asked about his parents. But he became distant. Distracted. Always on his phone, always busy. When I'd ask what was wrong, he'd just smile and say, "Work's stressful, that's all." But I wasn't blind. He wasn't coming home late because of work. I just didn't know it yet. Then came that night, the one I'll never forget. We were sitting at dinner. I had just told him I was proud of us for making it through such a rough time. That we were stronger now. He looked at me, emotionless, and said words that froze my heart. "I'm leaving you, Emma." Just like that. No argument, no warning. I laughed at first, I thought it was a cruel joke. But he didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He said it again, slower this time. "I'm leaving you." I felt the air drain from my chest. Leaving me? After everything I've done for you? For your family? My voice cracked, my hands shaking. He just looked down and said, "You've been great, but I'm not happy anymore. Mom was right, we're just different." Mom was right. Those words cut deeper than any knife. And then she walked in. His mother, as if she'd been waiting for her cue. She stood there, arms crossed, with that little smirk she always wore when she thought she'd won. "We never really liked you anyway," she said. "You were never the right fit for this family. But thank you for cleaning up our mess." My knees went weak. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Daniel didn't even defend me. He just stood there, silent, while his mother's words echoed like poison in the air. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why. But no words came out. That night, he packed his things and left. Just like that, as if our years together meant nothing. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Every corner reminded me of what I'd lost. Every photo, every piece of furniture. A reminder of how easily love can turn into betrayal. For days I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. But somewhere between the tears and the silence, a new feeling started to grow inside me. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something sharper. Something stronger. Anger. Because as much as they thought they had broken me, they had only awakened a part of me that had been silent for too long. And if they thought I was the kind of woman who would just walk away quietly, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The first week after Daniel left felt like I was living someone else's life. I moved through the house like a ghost, picking up his coffee mugs, folding the shirts he forgot to take, trying to find pieces of myself in the wreckage he left behind. Every corner whispered his name. Every sound reminded me of him. But the silence that followed, that was louder than anything I'd ever known. At first I kept waiting for a text. A call. Something. Some small sign that he regretted it. That he'd realized how cruel he had been. But it never came. Not a single word. That's when something inside me snapped. The woman who had begged for love died the day he walked out that door. What replaced her was someone who needed answers. So I started digging. I went through his emails, his old text messages, his work laptop that he had accidentally left behind. I wasn't proud of it, but after being lied to and used, pride wasn't something I cared much about anymore. And then, I found it. There it was, a message thread between Daniel and his mother. The very woman who had smiled at me as she stabbed me in the back. The messages went back months, way before the business crisis. Asterisk mom. Just convince her. She's got the money. Once it's done, we can be free of her. Asterisk. Asterisk Daniel. She won't say no. She loves me too much. Asterisk. Asterisk mom, good. Take what you can, then move on. She's holding you back. Asterisk. My hands trembled as I scrolled. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't stop reading. There were dozens of messages, plans, manipulations, fake emergencies. All of it. They had used me. Every tear, every sacrifice, every dollar, all part of their game. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just betrayal. It was cruelty wrapped in love, and I had fallen for every word. But as I sat there staring at the screen, the tears stopped. The shaking stopped. Something inside me went still, calm but dangerous. If they could plan behind my back, I could plan behind theirs. That night I started writing. A list. A plan. A strategy. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I wasn't going to throw things or call them out. No, I was going to make them feel what I felt. Not with anger, but with precision. I wanted them to lose everything they thought they had gained. Slowly, quietly, until the only thing they had left was regret. But before I could move forward, I needed to know how deep their lies went. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in a while, Sophie, Daniel's former coworker. She'd left his company a few months ago after a disagreement, but I always had the sense she knew more than she let on. When she picked up my call, she sounded surprised. Emma? Wow. I didn't expect to hear from you. How are you holding up? I hesitated, then said, I just need to know the truth, Sophie. About Daniel. About what he was really doing. There was a pause on the line, a heavy one. Then she sighed. I didn't want to get involved, but, Emma, he wasn't just leaving you. He's been seeing someone else. A client. For months. My grip on the phone tightened. Who? Her name's Clara, Sophie said softly. His mom introduced them. They've been planning to start a business together. With your money. My heart stopped. My money. The money I had drained my savings for, the money I thought was helping his family. They had used it as their investment fund. Sophie sent me a few screenshots. There it was, Daniel and Clara smiling at a restaurant. Daniel signing some kind of business partnership form. It wasn't just an affair. It was theft. After I hung up, I just sat there for hours staring at the wall. It was strange. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel broken anymore. I felt powerful. Because now, I had something they didn't. The truth. And truth, I realized, was more dangerous than any weapon. That night, I walked into our study, the one Daniel used to call his office. I opened his drawer and found a small box. Inside were the keys to his family's warehouse, the same one tied to their business. I smiled to myself. If they thought they'd taken everything from me, they were wrong. Because they had left behind something far more valuable, a trail. And I was going to follow it step by step until every one of their lies came crashing down. The next morning, I packed a small bag, took the keys and walked out of the house, not as the woman they betrayed, but as the woman they underestimated. And that would be their biggest mistake. I drove to the warehouse at dawn. The sky was still painted in gray-blue shadows, the kind that make everything feel uncertain, like the world itself is holding its breath. It was quiet when I arrived. The old family warehouse sat on the edge of town, behind rows of rusted gates and cracked concrete. For years, Daniel had called it the heart of the business. I had never been allowed inside before. He always said it was too stressful or not my concern. Now it was very much my concern. As I unlocked the gate, the creak of metal echoed across the lot. I hesitated for a second, part of me still couldn't believe I was doing this. But then I remembered his mother's smirk. The one she gave me when she said, asterisk, we never liked you anyway. Asterisk. That memory alone pushed me forward. Inside, the warehouse smelled like dust, paper, and secrets. Rows of shelves lined the walls filled with boxes, receipts, ledgers. Everything Daniel's family had hidden away from the world. At first, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just kept opening boxes, flipping through old files. But then I noticed something strange. A pile of brand new documents sitting on top of an old desk. The ink was still fresh. I sat down and began reading. My heart started pounding faster with every page. Invoices, bank transfers, company registration papers, all filed under Daniel's new partnership with Clara. They had used my $80,000 as the seed money. The business name was Crestwood Designs. The ownership? 70% Daniel, 20% Clara, and 10% under a name I didn't recognize, Margaret Lane. But when I looked closer at the address tied to Margaret's name, my jaw dropped. It was his mother's address. So that was their plan. They hadn't just taken my money. They had built a new life with it. A company, a partnership, and a cover story that erased me entirely. For a few moments, I just stared at the papers, my chest tight. I wanted to scream, to tear everything apart. But instead I smiled, a cold, steady smile. Because now I had proof. And proof meant power. I started taking photos of every document, every signature. I created a digital copy of the entire file on my phone, then backed it up on my cloud drive. My hands were steady now. I wasn't just a heartbroken wife anymore. I was a woman building her case. As I went through the files, I found even more fake invoices, tax avoidance forms, records of money transfers to accounts under different names. It was clear Daniel and his family had been doing this for years, shifting money around to dodge debt, pretending to fail while pocketing profits. And guess whose name they had used to register one of their loans? Mine. That was the final crack in the illusion. I wasn't just betrayed, I was framed. If things went wrong, the records would make it look like I was the one funding their schemes. I sat there for a long time, the weight of that realization pressing down on me. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I had to do. They had built this world of lies, thinking I'd never find it. But I was going to use their own secrets against them. I took one last look around the warehouse before I left. Dust floated in the air like ghosts of broken promises. As I locked the gate behind me, I whispered to myself, "You wanted to play games, Daniel? Fine. Let's play." Over the next few days, I carefully gathered everything I could: bank statements, old messages, proof of the affair, copies of transactions. I built a private folder I called The Truth. But I wasn't going to go to the police yet. No, that would be too easy. Too fast. I wanted them to feel safe first, confident, untouchable, before I pulled the ground out from under them. Then one evening, as I sat on the couch reviewing my notes, a message popped up on my phone. A photo. Daniel and Clara, smiling, at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for their new business. They had posted it online, all dressed up, celebrating their fresh start. My blood boiled, but I smiled again, because I already had my next move. I typed a short message under the photo, not a comment, but a private note to myself. Asterisk, you took my money, my trust, and my love. Now I'll take your reputation, your comfort, and your peace. Asterisk. The revenge had begun. And they had no idea that the woman they thought they destroyed was about to become their biggest nightmare. I learned early on that people who lie the loudest fear the quietest moves. They crave applause, attention, the comfort of everyone nodding along. So I decided to take away the applause first. For weeks I had been stitching together pieces of their life, ledgers, messages, photos. I turned them into a story no one could ignore. But stories need an audience. They needed witnesses. And I knew exactly where to find both. First, I rebuilt my face, not because I wanted to hide, but because people listen differently when you look composed. I started leaving the house again, smiling politely, running into old neighbors and acquaintances. I let the town see me walk with my head held high. Rumors travel faster when they meet a confident woman. That was my first small victory. Reclaiming my presence. Next, I carefully positioned my evidence. Not all at once. Not like a courtroom drama where everyone already hates the villain. No, I seeded tiny truths into places Daniel and his mother would check. A banker's office where they'd applied for a loan. A business contact who used to brag about Crestwood's clever tricks. An old friend of Clara's who had a soft spot for gossip. Each person I nudged into curiosity became a pebble, and together they would start an avalanche. I began with Clara. She loved the spotlight. The way she laughed along at their parties, the designer label she wore, the photos of her smiling with Daniel. People admired her. People would notice if she started to crumble. I found an old client of Crestwood who had been quietly unhappy with how invoices were handled. I didn't threaten, I listened. I asked questions that made him remember small slights, then asked if he'd be willing to share his experience. He did. He wasn't eager to get involved, but he liked being heard. That was enough. Then I sent a carefully worded message to a local business reporter. Anonymous, professional, fact-based. I attached a nugget of proof. A copy of an invoice that didn't match the delivery records. No accusations. Just questions. Journalists love questions. They dig. The story didn't explode yet, but it made them start to look. At the same time, I started to unravel social threads. I reconnected with Daniel's sister, a woman who had always resented her mother's favoritism but never spoke up. I didn't force her hand. I simply reminded her of moments she'd felt overlooked, showed her a polite copy of an account where her mother had funneled money to an off-book partner. She cried, then thanked me. That night she called her husband and said things she'd never said before. That call was another pebble dropped. While the town waited and journalists pretended not to notice, I orchestrated a smaller private sting. A staged investor meeting. I posed as an interested silent partner, someone who could bring in a modest amount of capital and connections. I arranged it through a business intermediary I'd contacted under a different name. Daniel and Clara, hungry for validation, came dressed to impress. They loved being admired. They read each other's eyes like lovers who'd been given permission to shine. I sat at the back of the room. Up front, they presented their plans with the same rehearsed smiles. Their speeches were slick, full of ambition. At the end, when questions came, they handled them with arrogance. That arrogance is what I fed on. After the meeting, I let the intermediary praise them loudly in public. At the same time, I made a casual complaint to a vendor who'd been ghosted on a payment. I asked if they'd feel comfortable sharing their paperwork. The vendor did. The intermediary, pleased with the potential deal, forwarded the vendor's note to contacts, and someone in that circle, quietly reliable, saw a mismatch and mentioned it to the intermediary. The intermediary forwarded it back to me, thinking he was helping. Instead, he had completed my loop. When the first journalist finally reached out to Daniel's office with a calm, professional request for clarification, I watched how they moved. Daniel laughed it off. Clara's smile slipped for a fraction of a second. His mother called a meeting and slammed her hand on the table, insisting everything was legitimate. Pride was the sound of their defenses being thrown up. But cracks formed where pride grows heavy. The reporter published a short, responsible piece the next morning. Nothing sensational, just a factual note that an investigation might be warranted. It was enough. Enough for clients to whisper. Enough for a supplier to delay a shipment. Enough for a small tax advisor to recommend a review. I didn't celebrate. I sat quietly and watched. Every silence they felt, every delay they endured, was a stitch being pulled from their fabric of confidence. That night Daniel texted me. One word, why? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. My silence was a louder message than anything I could type. He didn't know what I had done, but he knew the world was beginning to shift under his feet, and that terrified him. As the pressure mounted outside, their family unity wavered inside. Arguments leaked through thin doors at odd hours. His mother, who had once been so assured, paced and muttered plans. Daniel burned through his phone calls, speaking faster and louder until his voice was hoarse. Clara called less. Her public smile kept appearing in photos, but her eyes showed strain. They demanded I be small, invisible. They'd wanted me to disappear. Instead, I had become the quiet architect of their unraveling. The trap wasn't violent or dramatic. It was meticulous and patient. And the best part? They still believed they were untouchable. I closed my laptop with a soft click and stood by the window, watching the house across the street where his mother lived. The lights in the upstairs room flicked off. For a moment, I thought of the woman smiling that night at dinner, smug and certain. I thought of how that smile would look when everything they had built on my back began to crumble. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would pull the next string. The one that would turn whispers into a roar. But I wasn't reckless. I was ready. When you push people high enough with lies, they start to believe the air up there belongs to them. That's what Daniel and his family had done, built their kingdom on stolen air. But I was done watching them breathe easy. By the second week after the article, small ripples had turned into waves. Clients began canceling meetings. The suppliers demanded payments up front. Their once proud Crestwood design started to look more like a sinking ship than a rising brand. And I was still invisible, just as I wanted. But invisibility doesn't mean silence. Every move I made was quiet but precise. I had sent one anonymous email to the tax department, attaching a few of the financial files I'd photographed in that dusty warehouse. I didn't need to accuse them of anything. The numbers spoke for themselves. Mismatched invoices, unreported funds, names that didn't exist. 2 days later, the investigation began. I knew at the moment Daniel's mother appeared outside the warehouse one morning, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear, her face pale and furious. She was yelling at someone. Maybe Daniel, maybe Clara, about auditors and records. I sat in my car across the street, sipping coffee, watching her unravel. Funny how power looks different when the camera isn't on your side. The next few days I let my plan breathe on its own. I didn't push anything. I didn't send another tip or message. I just watched the natural weight of truth pull their empire apart. The bank froze one of their business accounts for verification. A supplier posted online about late payments and unprofessional conduct. The same reporter who had written that short article now had a follow-up, Crestwood Designs under financial review. I didn't need to lift a finger. They were digging their own graves, one panicked decision at a time. Then came the part one had been waiting for. The charity gala. Daniel's mother hosted one every year. A grand event for local business leaders. Cameras, speeches, endless flattery. The family's pride and proof of status. Even after the article, she refused to cancel it. We have a reputation to protect, she had apparently told everyone. Perfect. I still had the invitation she'd sent months ago. And though I wasn't welcome anymore, no one stopped me at the entrance. I came dressed not as the discarded wife, but as the woman they tried to erase. Elegant, calm, untouchable. When I walked in, heads turned. I could feel whispers brushing the air around me. People wondering what I was doing there. Daniel froze when he saw me. Clara's smile faltered. His mother's jaw tightened so hard I thought it might crack. I didn't speak to them. I didn't have to. I simply waited for my cue. Halfway through the night, as the speeches began, the big screen behind the stage flickered. And that's when it happened. A video started playing. Not mine, at least not directly. It was a local news clip, the reporter's newest story, showing images of Crestwood's financial documents, interviews with anonymous sources, and lines like, evidence suggests funds were misused and falsely reported by company executives. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed. And in the corner, I watched Daniel's mother's hand tremble as she tried to keep smiling. Daniel's face went pale. Clara looked ready to vanish. No one knew I was the reason this story existed. No one suspected that the anonymous sources were my doing. I just stood there, glass in hand, watching their carefully built image crumble in front of their own guests. When the video ended, the room fell silent. The host tried to recover, stuttering through applause that never came. I simply turned, gave Daniel one long look and left. Outside, the night was cool. I stood under the lights, breathing deeply, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: peace. But revenge isn't just about exposure. It's about justice. And I wasn't finished yet. A week later, I received an email from the authorities confirming that Crestwood's accounts were officially under review. One of their partners had filed a fraud complaint. Clara had disappeared from social media, and Daniel's mother had quietly sold one of their properties. And then, for the first time in a long while, Daniel called me. His voice was shaky. "Emma, we need to talk. Please." I almost laughed. He sounded small. The man who once acted like he owned my life was now begging for a conversation. "I don't think there's anything left to say," I replied calmly. "Emma, they're investigating everything. They're saying I signed off on the wrong files." "You did," I interrupted softly. "Maybe you should talk to your mother about that." There was silence on the line. Then he whispered, "Was this you?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "No, Daniel. This was you." I hung up. For a long time I just sat there, letting the silence wash over me. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who gave everything for love. The one who believed that kindness would be enough. That woman was gone. And in her place stood someone stronger. Someone who didn't just survive betrayal. She rewrote it. As I looked out the window that night, I saw a single truth shining clearer than ever. They had taken my money, but I had taken something they'd never get back. Their reputation. Their control. Their pride. And I wasn't done yet, because the final piece of my revenge was still waiting. The part that would make sure Daniel and his family never forgot the name Emma Carter again. By the time the investigation reached full swing, the town was buzzing. Everyone who had once admired Daniel's family now whispered behind their backs. The empire that once looked unshakable had started to rot from the inside. But I wasn't watching from afar anymore. I was steering it quietly, patiently right to the edge. After the gala, Daniel tried calling me again. Then texting. Then showing up at my office, the one he never cared about when we were together. I didn't answer any of his calls. I let him stand outside that glass door, begging for the attention he had thrown away. The once confident man who told me I wasn't enough now looked desperate. His suit no longer fit right. His voice cracked when he spoke to the receptionist. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew what he wanted. He wanted forgiveness. He wanted the comfort of the woman he'd destroyed. But forgiveness isn't free. And this time I was the one setting the price. I knew the auditors were preparing their final report. And I knew that once it was public, Crestwood Designs would be done for good. But I wanted something more. Something that would remind Daniel and his family of exactly what they had done, every single time they saw my name. So, I went to work on my final move. Through Sophie, the same woman who had told me about Clara, I got in touch with one of Crestwood's former clients, a talented designer who had been cheated out of payment by Daniel's team. I offered to help her relaunch her brand, legally, transparently, with proper funding. That funding came from the one asset I still shared with Daniel, the house. The same home where he told me he was leaving me, right after I saved his family from ruin. I sold it. Every wall, every memory, every broken promise. When the deal closed, I stood in the empty living room one last time. The echo of silence was different now, not lonely but clean. Free. I whispered to the ghosts of that night. You took my heart for granted. Now I'm taking back my name. Then I walked out without looking back. 2 weeks later the headlines hit. Asterisk Crestwood Designs shut down amid fraud investigation. Asterisk. Asterisk Daniel Carter and Margaret Lane under financial scrutiny. Asterisk. Every news outlet carried the story. Photos of Daniel and his mother appeared beside the words misused funds, false reports, and asterisk legal review. Asterisk. The business they built with my money was officially gone. Frozen accounts. Cancelled contracts. Partners walking away. And the cherry on top? The brand I helped fund, the designer I had supported, was featured in the very same paper. Her company's new partner was listed as E. Carter Consulting. That's right. My name shining right next to theirs in the same column. One building their downfall, the other rebuilding from their ashes. The universe has a poetic way of balancing things when you stop begging and start acting.